This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again here in the Meetinghouse, coming to you from Hendersonville, North Carolina, where we have news, commentary, conversation on religion and American life. I want to announce right off the top that next week, next Thursday, I will be broadcasting from Brunswick, Georgia. Most of you know that I have a home on St. Simon's Island, and I have broadcast there many times through the radio station there on Brunswick and St. Simon's Island. And as most of you know, the trial of Ahmaud Arbery is underway. They're in jury selection now. I've reported that my wife was called up for jury duty, but she was excused last week, not only because of her age. Georgia has an allowance for people who are 70 and over to opt out of serving on a jury, but she was pretty clear in her written description on all the paperwork she had to turn in, what she thought about the case, and that would disqualify anybody as well. So, but they are in the midst of jury selection. I think they have reduced the pool down from 1,000 from where they started to about 64. And they hope to get it down to 16. That would be 12 jurors and 4 alternates. I think maybe by next Thursday. I don't know when opening arguments will begin, but we will report from there. My co-host next week will be Rachel Bregman, the very well-known rabbi at the Reform Temple of Judaism there in Brunswick. She's been in the Meetinghouse a number of times. She's a very articulate spokesperson. She has been one of the key leaders in the religious community and their response to both the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and all of the publicity that has developed over the last year. And I know you will enjoy hearing her. We'll have other people with us. We're going to set up live on the grounds of the courthouse, along with hundreds of other media people, I'm sure. We'll see how that goes. But I encourage you to join us next week as we try to continue the coverage of one of the most important events in American history last year. The death of Ahmaud Arbery launched a series, was the first in a series of deaths that galvanized Americans and really people worldwide with a call for racial justice. They culminated, of course, in the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, but Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky was right between them. And the murder started just a few days before I launched the video version of this program. And actually, no, the radio program. The radio program launched on March the 2nd, 2020. Ahmaud was killed on February the 23rd of 2020. And we did radio broadcast on the subject for a number of weeks. So we encourage you to join us next week as we travel to Brunswick, Georgia. My plans are, of course, to travel several places over the next several years to cover live stories. As a matter of fact, I'm planning to go to Washington, D.C. on January the 6th to cover the one-year anniversary of the insurrection, of the attempt to overturn the election of Joseph Biden as president. The word out just this week was that almost a third of the voting population thinks that election was illegitimate. This demonstrates how easily false reporting and fake news can take over even an electorate in a democracy and can misconstrue everything. But I plan to be in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure where we will set up. I am exploring that option right now, or who my guest will be. We're also considering staying on the air 2 hours on that day, and we will keep you posted on all of that. On Thanksgiving, which is a Thursday, of course, as is January the 6th, that's one of the reasons I'm going. January the 6th is on a Thursday. Thanksgiving is on a Thursday. I will be recording my program for that day earlier in the week, but it will focus on the resettlement efforts of religious groups to welcome and provide hospitality to the thousands of Afghan refugees who are coming here to live. Almost all of them are Muslim, and this offers a terrific opportunity for Christian, Jews, and Muslims in the United States to work together to show hospitality, which of course is important to all three religions, and to care for people who are fleeing danger and death. So that is on Thanksgiving Day. As I said, it will be recorded a little bit early. Today, as always, I have 5 news stories brought to you by my friends at Perfecto Coffee out in California, Perfecto Coffee Inc. You can go to perfectocoffeeinc.com and order some coffee. That's one of the ways to support the Meetinghouse, and I encourage you to do that. I send a bag to almost everybody who's on the show with me. It's possible that I've overlooked somebody or I've forgotten somebody, but that's my intent, to send a bag of coffee. I have to confess that I'm not a coffee drinker myself. I do drink a lot of tea, both hot tea and cold tea, but I've never gotten into the habit of drinking coffee. But I encourage you to drink. It's good for you. And if you're a guest on the show, I'm going to send you a bag of of this coffee, Perfecto Coffee Inc. I'll be back in just a minute with our 5 news stories, but we've been showing this short little video about the coffee, and I want to air it right now, then I'll be back. Perfecto Coffee. They're from Southern California, but my news starts in Minneapolis, Minnesota today. Springtide Research has released their findings on the concerns of young adults compared with how they perceive the concerns of the church. You can read the whole report online at their website, springtideresearch.org, I think. But they report that nearly 75% of those questions self-identify as religious. Even only 15% see the church as a place they can turn to in times of uncertainty. 52% of those affiliated with organized religion say they have little or no trust in religion. Their chief concerns are racial justice, disability, reproductive and immigration rights, and environmental protections. That doesn't surprise any of us, does it? But they perceive the church as significantly less interested in such matters. The poll involved more than 10,000 persons, ages 13 to 25 years of age, conducted earlier this year. I listened to a podcast this past week from a minister in Kentucky, whom I do not know. He's 41 years of age, he said. And he was talking about the resistance or the indifference of much of his generation to religion in general and the church in particular. And he talked about how the current generation is more interested in orthopraxy, which is right action, and not orthodoxy, that is right doctrine. And he talked about the need to identify with young people instead of exercise authority over them. How identity is more important than authority. It's a wonderful podcast. I think it's called Every Square Inch, which is a reference to Abraham Kuyper. The pastor is at Tates Creek Presbyterian Church, and you can go there and find his podcast, Every Square Inch. They are a very much reformed organization, but that did not come through very much in the podcast I listened to. I thought it was very well done. And I called to try to get him on the show, but wasn't able to do that, but we may do that a little bit later. From Houston, Texas, the World Series, of course, is opened this week with the white habits of the Dominican Sisters of Mary Immaculate visible in the stands. The growing convent of Vietnamese women rose to fame during the American League Championship Series as they were conspicuous fans cheering on the hometown Astros. The Astros won Game 2 last night in the World Series, beating Atlanta. The series is tied 1-1, as many of you know. You're watching it. These nuns are called the Rally Nuns. Their attendance at these games is funded by another famous man from Houston, Jim McIngvale. You may know him as Mattress Mac. He's a Catholic businessman who's made a lot of money in the mattress business. But he's also very famous for his wide-ranging philanthropy and generosity. For instance, during the last storm in Houston, when many people were without homes, he opened up every one of his stores and invited any homeless person driven by the storm to come into his mattress stores and sleep. He wagers a lot of money on Houston teams. He stands to win $22 million if the Astros win the World Series. I'm rooting for him and those Vietnamese women out there in the convent in Houston, Texas. Back to my hometown, Lexington, Kentucky, Dr. Ehsan Bagby, who was my guest last week, leading a team of Muslim scholars, has issued the 2020 report on mosque in America. He reported on that last week, and now they have published it. It's a once-in-a-decade assessment of the state of Islamic worship in the United States. They reported a growth over the last 10 years of 31% in the number of mosques, now numbering 2,769, up 31% in a decade. The report says that immigration, not conversion, is the driving force of this expansion. But here is a very interesting thing that he talked about last week, and that is in the report. Of these mosques, 2,769, most of them were built for some other purpose. That is, the Muslims do their work like Christians do their church planting. They frequently start in a building that was designed for other purposes, and they repurpose it for a religious assembly. This has been standard procedure for Christians for many years. Muslims have been doing it in our country. Of those 2,769 mosques, 1,025 were built as mosques, as opposed to being a building repurposed from other uses. I do know that Lexington has a new mosque. It's about 6 or 7 years old, but for many years, including the times when I first met Ehsan Bagby, they simply used an old house there not far from the university. The average attendance at Friday prayers is 410 per mosque, which means that on an average Friday in the United States, 1.2 million Muslims or seekers are gathered in mosque in America praying. That's about 1/4 of the total population of Muslims. Muslim population in the United States is about 4.5 million, which means on an average Friday, their numbers in worship are closely parallel the number of Christians who are in worship. That is, about a quarter of Christians would be in a worship service on any given Sunday morning. That's the most realistic number. Some people claim it's higher. Some of you who were listening last week heard us talk about, with Ehsan Bagby, how Islam got to America. And of course, they came over with the Africans who were captured in Africa and brought over as slaves. I referenced a book that I was reading at the time. I'm still reading it. I have found the book. It's called Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas. African Muslims enslaved in the Americas. You will remember we talked about how the plantation foreman at the leading plantation on St. Simon's Island was himself a very prominent Muslim, and yet had risen to a position of great influence and authority on one of the early plantations in America. From Atlanta, Georgia, not only is there a World Series being played, partially in Atlanta, which is ironic since the Major League Baseball pushed out the All-Star game from Atlanta because of the restrictions on voting that were enacted by the Republican legislature, making it more difficult for especially people of color to vote. But here comes the World Series. The Atlanta Braves have had a great season, now playing the Houston Astros for the World Series. But in Atlanta, there's something else going on. The Academy of Preachers, which is headquartered at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, is launching its first post-pandemic schedule of events with a preaching festival in Atlanta on the campus of Morehouse College. They're going to use the theme, "Where are the prophetic preachers?" The AOP, as it's commonly known, is inviting all young people, high school, college, seminary, of all Christian traditions, Catholic, Orthodox, Pentecostal, Evangelical, Protestant, to name the 5 major traditions, young people from these traditions to prepare a sermon and come to Morehouse College to preach. They are going to have some senior preachers there, as they always do. Dr. Kelly Farrow, the creator of an organization called Circle of Sacred Fire, and Dr. David L. Lattimore, director of the Betsy Stockton Center for Black Church Studies at Princeton Seminary. They're also going to offer 3 preaching classes while they're there. It's scheduled for November the 13th. So I have a couple of more weeks to help them promote. As most of you know, I launched and led this organization, the Academy of Preachers, for about 10 years. I have a lot of energy vested in it. It's a wonderful organization. And I hope if you know some young preacher who is listening today or watching, you will encourage them to attend. Finally, from Los Angeles, California, the famous and influential musician Ralph Carmichael died last week, actually just before our show last week. He was 94 years old, widely considered the father of contemporary Christian music. It was a passion he pursued after achieving success in the secular music business out in California. He was a child prodigy with the violin. He had perfect pitch. Carmichael took his talents to the Christian community, and he said much later, quote, "What I have been doing most of my adult life is waging stubborn battle for the freedom and liberty to experiment with different kinds of music for the glory of God," end quote. Well, he helped inaugurate a transformation of religion and religious music in the United States. It's hard to think of any single thing more important in modern Christian life in the United States than contemporary Christian music. It dominates all the larger churches and many of the smaller churches. The guitar has replaced certainly the organ and often the piano, and most of the time the guitar and the electric keyboard have replaced the piano and the organ in many, many churches. Many seminaries have discontinued the teaching of traditional church music and have replaced it with contemporary music because that's where the students are and that's what many of the churches want. It would be interesting to know whether this trend, which began about the 1970s, has anything to do with the most recent trend in religion in America, and that is the decline in religion, the decline in attendance, especially among young people. You would think that young people would like the contemporary music and that it would be a drawing card. But now it's the younger people, as I said a little earlier on the show, age 40 and younger, who are leaving the church. They are the de-churched as opposed to the unchurched. I normally think of the unchurched of those who have never been in church, and the de-churched as those who were active at one point, very active at one point. Perhaps even singing in a praise band. Many of you have known and heard my occasional religion news commentator in the Meetinghouse, Tom Crottenmaker. He works for Yale University and writes for the newspaper USA Today. But when he was in school, he played for a praise band. Now he is de-churched, does not consider himself a Christian or a church person, wrote a book called The Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower. It's a very good book. I encourage you to use it in your church. But all of this was started, or at least largely influenced, by Ralph Carmichael. His most famous composition, to use the right word, is a song entitled, "He's Everything to Me." I remember the song vividly. We sang it all the time in the West Kentucky church where I was, and then again in St. Louis, where I was during my later high school years. He was featured in the Billy Graham film, The Restless Ones. He generated great controversy when he did this. He brought 2 guitars, an electric bass, and a set of drums into the recording studio. Now, thousands of churches across America are doing that. 2 guitars, an electric bass, and a set of drums right in the sanctuary. I've been in some churches where the music was so loud you couldn't hear anything. And another thing that I've noticed in the many contemporary churches that I've visited over the years is how few people in the congregation sing while the praise band is singing. I should do a whole show on that sometime, a whole show on contemporary Christian music. But this is something that I've noticed consistently, that there's very little congregational singing in a contemporary church. The praise band sings, and that's, of course, boomed everywhere. That's all the news. I'm going to be back in just a minute with some more information about books. But I want to play this video for you. It's an old video. Ralph Carmichael, "He's Everything to Me."
In the stars his handiwork I see, on the wind he speaks with majesty, though he ruleth over land and sea. What is that to me? I will celebrate nativity, for it has a place in history. Sure, he came to set his people free. What is that to me? Till by faith I met him face to face, and I felt the wonder of his grace. Then I knew that he was more than just a God who didn't care, that lived away out there, and now he walks beside me day by day, ever watching o'er me lest I stray, helping me to find that narrow way. He's everything to me, till by faith I met him face to face, and I felt the wonder of his grace. Then I knew that he was more than just a God who didn't care, that lived away out there, and now he walks beside me day by day, ever watching o'er me lest I stray, helping me to find that narrow way. He's everything to me.
Well, for some of you who are watching today or listening, I'm sure that brought back some old memories, some good memories, as it did for me. I suppose I was in high school when that song came out. I remember it vividly. We sang it quite often. And then when I became a youth minister while I was in college in Lexington, Kentucky, of course, we sang it with the young people there. The song was one of many that had a very powerful influence, not only on me, but on my whole family. And I want to say that I have spent most of this week with my three siblings. I have three siblings, David, my older brother, Debbie and Dina, my two younger siblings. I want to keep that picture up on the screen while I talk about them. This is what I want to say, and I want to say it as a way of encouraging you to follow this pattern. Our mother died in 2008. Our father died in 2013. They were much beloved people, but those two events drew the four of us together in ways that we had never been prior to their death. And since then, we have made a deliberate and successful attempt to stay connected. We do this by once or twice a year. We get together, just the four of us, no spouses, no children, no grandchildren. Now, we talk about our spouses and we talk about our children, we talk about our grandchildren, but mostly we talk about what's going on in our lives and how we got to where we are today and what it was like growing up together. We even talked about this song and the little book that my sister Debbie there in the pink gave to me, cleaning out her house. She gave me a book of these old songs, one of the very first contemporary Christian music songbooks. And I have it here somewhere in the house, but I could not find it, put my hands on it in order to show it to you today. So we gathered here in Western North Carolina. David came in on Saturday, and he and I spent all day Monday on Chimney Rock, North Carolina. I thought I had never been there, but when I started to tell my grandson, Sam, about my trip, he said, "Papa, you and I have been there together. We climbed to the top." Well, Dave and I climbed to the top, and we kept going. That is the top of Chimney Rock, but the ridge behind it is hundreds of more feet up in the air, and then there is a long path over to the top of the falls. And he and I, he's 72, I'm 71, we walked the whole way. Not 1% of the people who go there go to the top of the falls like we did. We were quite proud of our achievement. It was very difficult for me to come down, much more difficult to come down, much more hard on my knees, but we had to take it really slow. But then the girls came in, and all day Tuesday, we spent up on the Blue Ridge Parkway taking pictures of each other and the mountains, and visiting the little villages that populate Western Pennsylvania. It has been a perfectly gorgeous week. After the girls left, my brother David and I spent yesterday on a 4.5 mile hike up in the Pisgah Mountain National Forest, which is through which the Blue Ridge Parkway runs here in western North Carolina. We hiked the whole way. We had no trouble. It was up and down, and the falls were beautiful. I've put some pictures up on my Facebook page, but I tell you this story. David, my brother Debbie, my sister Debbie in the middle in pink, she lives in Lexington. My sister Dina, she lives in Louisville, Kentucky. I tell you this to encourage you to do the same, to make an effort, make it a priority in life with your siblings. It's been very important to us. We were together early in the year when my brother David's wife, Raina, died after a 2.5-year battle with cancer. That brought us together even closer. And these type of adventures are doing the same. We spent a long time talking about, well, where are we going to go next? And we talked about New York, and we talked about Florida, and we talked about Nashville, going back to the mountains of Kentucky. I want to encourage you in that regard. But one of the things that we also talked about was books that we are reading. And we encouraged each other to bring a book that we had read that was important, that we thought other people ought to read. I brought the book, White Too Long. Some of you have read this book. Robert P. Jones is the author of it. He was born and raised a Baptist in Mississippi, went to Mississippi College and then to Southwestern Seminary in Texas, and then got his PhD from Emory University in Atlanta. But he wrote this book about his journey from being white, too isolated white, and his journey toward understanding the history of Black life in America, the negative power of racism that had so swamped all of the churches. And when I read the book, I read it as it was my story too. It's such a powerful book. I encourage it for you. I've got a review of it on our website at themeetinghouse.net. Robert P. Jones was our guest in the Meeting House just about a year ago. We talked about that book. He is a very articulate man. If you ever get a chance to hear him speak or go hear him speak, I would encourage that. I sent that book home with one of my siblings, and I picked up the book that one of them brought, and I'm going to show it here. I haven't yet started reading, but I am going to read it. I had read a review of it. Philip Yancey's autobiography, Where the Light Fell. What a great title. Shows you how skilled he is as a writer. He also grew up poor in Atlanta, among Southern fundamentalists, just like I did. Fundamentalist religion shaped many of us, and getting out of the fundamentalism is a long journey. I give thanks to God that I was able to escape fundamentalism. How it happened, I don't know, but much of it because my parents were open to the world. They supported my attendance at Georgetown College in Kentucky, a first-rate liberal arts college, where I got a first-rate education about religion and history and American culture. But I'm going to read this book. I will review it. I will try to get Philip Yancey as my guest here in the Meeting House and talk to him about this. Many of you have read his books over the years. They are terrific books. We used them at Georgetown College when I was on the faculty there. What's so amazing about grace? Is that one of them? I think so. I'm going to set that book aside. I'm reading two other books, preparing to interview their authors. One of them is To Live in God, Daily Reflections with Walter Rauschenbusch. Walter Rauschenbusch was a Baptist pastor in New York City. They got concerned not just about the spiritual side of life, but the social side. the social conditions in which his parishioners were living. And he began to agitate for the government, the state, and the churches to spend more time addressing the social needs of people, housing and food and medical care. And here we are 100 years later, still dealing with this. Now, there are many people who don't think this is the business of religion. And many of the churches want to discount this kind of social justice. They don't think it's part of the gospel. This is one of the great divides, as I reported a little bit earlier here in the show, between young people and their elders. The elders tend to limit religion to personal spirituality or public worship. But the younger generation, more than we were, has been gripped by the need for social justice. I got my first taste of that, of course, under Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, but more recently in the concerns about global warming and healthcare and water in Michigan and the pandemic and these types of things, rights for gay and lesbian people. All of these things are my concerns and the concerns of many young people. Much of that began with this man, Walter Rauschenbusch. Of course, he got it from Jesus, we think, and from Moses. And here is another book that whose author, Adam Russell Taylor, is scheduled to be my guest in just a few weeks. He is the new president of Sojourners in Washington, D.C. Many of you know that Sojourners was the very influential social justice advocacy organization in Washington, launched and led for many, many years by Jim Wallace. Jim retired earlier this year. He's now teaching at Georgetown University, but his successor, Adam Russell Taylor, has written this book, A More Perfect Union, a New Vision for Building the Beloved Community. Now, you'll recognize that phrase, the beloved community, comes out of the New Testament, particularly the Gospel of John. It was particularly a favorite phrase of Martin Luther King. It has become widely used now in the social justice movement or the social justice movements associated with the Christian and religious communities in America. And I am about a third of the way through this book. I will have it read, I hope, by next week, and I will have a book review of it for you, and we will talk with him about it. He's calling, I can tell already by what I've read, he's calling for a new national story. One of the big issues in America right now are the people who were omitted from the national story. That is Native Americans. I'm right here in Western Pennsylvania. I've been tromping all over the woods. Every time I go in the woods, I think about the original inhabitants over here, the Cherokee. We call them Indians now, but they were the Cherokee Native people who lived like the Shawnee and the Dakotas, the Sioux and the Apache, the Comanche, many of the people who lived in America who gave names to the rivers and lakes and mountains and states and cities all around us. They were largely omitted from the original story of America. Our story started with discovery by Christopher Columbus. He really didn't discover anything. He stumbled upon large civilizations here. And then the next part of our traditional story is those great documents that have shaped democracy. That is the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and then finally, 75 years later, the Gettysburg Address. That was kind of summarized the middle portion of our story. And then in the 20th century, world domination, as we rose to be the great world power, the empire that dominates the world today. So discovery, documents, and domination are the three pieces of the traditional story of America that excludes a lot of people. And he's calling for a new story that speaks to freedom and justice for all. It's a compelling book. I look forward to talking with him about that. And I'll be interested in what you're reading and what you think I should read. Somebody in the little church where I pastor wrote me this morning and said, I want you to read, I want to share this book with you by Richard Rohr. I told her, bring it to church on Sunday and I'll be glad to read it. You can post in the Facebook comments or go to our website at the Meetinghouse.net, and we're at the bottom of every page on that website. There is a response form, and you can tell me who you are and where you're listening from and send me some suggestion about a book to read. I'll be back in just a minute. We'll take a very short break here. I'll be back in just a minute with my commentary for the week. You're listening to the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody, coming to you from our studio in the beautiful region of Western North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Parkway, the Appalachian Mountains, the Smoky Mountains, all of that just a short drive from our studio right here. My commentary today is entitled Clean and Unclean. Clean and Unclean. It addresses an event that happened in our state, in North Carolina, earlier this summer, in a place called Seagrove. It's a small community of some 285 souls. It sits just off Interstate 73 south of Greensboro in a county of 141,752 people. If you turn east on Asbury Church Road, it will bring you to, you guessed it, Asbury Baptist Church. The Reverend J. Allen Mashburn is the pastor there. He attended Tennessee Temple University in Chattanooga and features in his teaching what scholars call eschatology. That is, the study of the end of the age, the return of Jesus, the final judgment. But had you been in that church in June of this year, you would have also heard the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, a Mr. Mark Robinson. I suspect you would remember what he said, at least in part. And I'm going to quote it for you. Quote, I'm saying this now, and I've been saying it, and I don't care who likes it. Those issues have no place in a school. There's no reason anybody anywhere should be telling any child about transgenderism, homosexuality, any of that filth. End quote. Then he doubled down on the filth. Quote, and yes, I called it filth, he said. And if you don't like it, that I called it filth, come and see me and I'll explain it to you, end quote. The comments of the Lieutenant Governor were recorded, of course. Video cameras are everywhere these days. And a few months later, the public knew all about it. There are many religious groups that still consider sexual orientation a matter of grave moral consequence. They forbid homosexual activity and frown on gender change surgery. This is the prerogative of such groups, given our commitment to religious freedom. There was a time when religious groups said similar things about Jews and Catholics and liberals and blacks and Latinos, to name a few. Pastor Mashburn, a white man wanting to defend both his church and the public official that he hosted, posted on his Facebook page this statement by another white minister, a Reverend Gary Miller of Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm going to quote it in full as well. Quote, North Carolina's Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson has taken a stand against filth posing as virtue. He's calling for an audit of textbooks or teachings that groom innocent children, preparing them for a life that deviates from God's plan for their lives. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor has been opposed by those who support violating the innocence of children. Sadder still, there are those who are calling for his resignation for speaking the truth. The political crucifixion can only take place if this honorable man is crucified between two thieves, silent saints and shameful charlatans. All over North Carolina, pastors and church leaders are standing up and opposing the abusers who want to end his political life. Pray for North Carolina pastors. They're some of God's finest. End quote. Well, I'm a preacher for a North Carolina congregation. Whether or not I'm one of God's finest is an open question at this point. But I do know I need the prayers of my congregation, and you also, if you're so inclined. But somebody else who needs our prayers is the good Lieutenant Governor of our state. He also needs to read the Bible, especially the story recounted in the Acts of the Apostles, wherein Simon Peter refuses to associate with a certain group of people. They were unclean, he thought. You can read it in chapter 10 of the Acts of the Apostles. Unclean, you know, is an old religious word that means filth. The apostle of our Lord Jesus Christ, Simon Peter, was struggling with the same moral confusion that has pushed our lieutenant governor into hot water. Are there really some people who are clean and other people who are unclean? Some people who are filthy and some people who are not? While all of this was going on, Rachel Levine was sworn in as the first openly transgender four-star admiral, capping a career in the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, and demonstrating how a transgendered person can be themselves and be a distinguished public servant at the same time. And Pete Buttigieg is traveling around the country as Secretary of Transportation. He's trying to solve the serious delivery problems currently plaguing the economy of the United States and the world. And he's a homosexual, you know. He and his partner have just adopted a little child. He took parental leave, was roundly ridiculed by certain elements in the media. I'll tell you this, on any given Sunday, millions of gay and transgendered Christians will gather with the rest of us for worship and service in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Most of us will not even notice, and the rest of us will not care. But I, as a congregational minister, will greet them with the very same traditional words that I greet you and everybody who comes into our church. Quote, grace and peace to you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, end quote. If and when the Lieutenant Governor Robinson comes into our little sanctuary in Hendersonville, North Carolina, I'll greet him the same way. No better, no worse, just the same. But if he starts to denigrate any of our people and use that kind of language in our sanctuary, I'll rebuke him using the same words by which the angel rebuked Simon Peter. Quote, do not call something or somebody filthy if God has made him clean. End quote. I'm Dwight A. Moody in the Meetinghouse. That's what I think. I'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I want to share just a piece of news with you, or what I hope will be news. I've been using this phrase, the Meetinghouse, since 1998, both writing columns and hosting first a radio show, and then launching into the video world. We have several studios. We broadcast, of course, from over the radio in Brunswick, Georgia, and over the video out of Louisville, Kentucky. But I'm looking to find a studio here in North Carolina and to raise the production values of this broadcast. And I've been researching schools, television companies, independent studios all over this region, seeking one that would partner with me in taking the Meetinghouse to a new level. Perhaps you want to pray with me about this. I'm in conversation right now with a network of people about this. Producing a better product that we can distribute through St. Stephen's Live and through Rejoice Radio down in Georgia. I hope within the next couple of weeks to continue these discussions, perhaps have it in place by the beginning of the new year. I encourage you today and always to visit our website at themeetinghouse.net. There are hundreds of things on there to read. Many of them are book reviews. Many are my commentaries. I've got them arranged into categories. I have a category for C.S. Lewis and John Prine and my father, Tom Moody. I have a category about my journey and the things I've had to deal with in my life. Categories of Roman Catholics and Southern Baptist and religion in America. So I encourage you to log on to the commentary page and read some things there. Tell me what you think. At the bottom of every page, there is a response form. And you can tell me. I hear from people every week. If you would like to receive the newsletter that I send out each Wednesday night, I send it out at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night, Eastern Standard Time. It includes a commentary, including this week, the one I just read this week was last week's commentary because I didn't have enough time last week to read it. My commentary this week is entitled, Are We Paying Attention? It's a very sharp critique of what's going on in America and what I see developing. How the culture wars, a phrase that we have been accustomed to hearing now for 50 years since it was, I think, introduced into public discourse by the Reverend Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority. culture wars, how culture wars can slide into civil war. And the insurrection of January the 6th makes us think about that. But you can read my commentary there on the website at themeetinghouse.net. You can tell me what you think about it. You can correct me if I've made mistakes or if I'm overlooking something. On our Facebook page, of course, are all of our shows that we record here, Facebook Live. You can go to facebook.com/themeetinghouse.net and watch any of our back shows. Now, I want to warn you that there are two other Meeting House websites. One of them, themeetinghouse.org, is a congregation up in Columbia, Maryland, whose longtime pastor was my college roommate, Dr. David Stansel. He may be listening here today. If he is, I give you a shout out, Dave. We were in college together, graduated 50 years ago from Georgetown College, 50 years ago this coming May, and we're looking forward to our reunion. The golden anniversary class of 1972 regathered on the campus there in May of 2022. But he pastored a congregation known as the Meeting House, or they met in the Meeting House there in Columbia, Maryland. There's also themeetinghouse.com, which is another religious broadcast, I think somewhere over in Mississippi. And they have music and teaching much more religiously or worship-oriented or advocacy-oriented than our Meeting House here coming to you today out of Western North Carolina. So make sure you get on the right website. It'll have my picture on the homepage. Although the picture was taken a couple of years ago before I had my ponytail. Have you seen my ponytail? I was in a store yesterday with my brother over in Brevard, and my brother went to the counter to buy 2 books and some things for his grandchildren. And the man who waited on us had beautiful white hair. It came a foot down past his neck. I told him how much I liked it. Themeetinghouse.net. Go to our website there. You can make a donation. I wish you would. We need your support in order to continue what we are doing. And if you make a donation, we'll list you as part of our Circle of 70. Our goal is to have 70 donors who will support us. I think we're at maybe 35 or something like that, maybe 33. We're not even halfway to our goal. We have a long way to go. We need you to help us keep the show on the air. I want to thank you for listening today or watching wherever you are. We're broadcasting out of rejoice975.com. That's over 97.5 FM, 94.7 FM in Glenn County, Georgia. That's Brunswick, where we will be next week, and St. Simon's Island. Thanks to my engineer down there, Everett Armstrong, and my engineer in Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky, Alex Mattingly. They both do a great job. I count them as good friends. You can follow me on Twitter at Dwight A. Moody. And until next week, when we will broadcast from Brunswick, I encourage you to get a vaccine, wash your hands, wear a mask, drink some coffee, order some coffee from Perfecto Coffee Inc. Pray for the soul of America. Be kind to everyone you meet. In the Meeting House, I'm Dwight Moody. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.